Hello guys, today I'm going to be teaching you all about configurations in Bukkit. Now there are three types of configuration files. The first one is the default configuration file, which is created and provided by Bukkit. It's the file that's named config.yml inside of the plugins directory. The second type of configurations are the custom configuration files. This is any other file that contains any sort of configuration on the inside, such as JSON, YML files, even custom files, a whole bunch of different file types. And then the third type is object configurations, where you want to store objects as files. And I'm going to show you how to do all three of these. So first we're going to start off with the most basic one, which is the Bukkit configuration. Now to create this, all you have to do is make a new file inside of your jar file. Now this is either going to be in your source folder or in your resources folder if you're using Gradle or Maven. But for me, I'm not using any of that, so I'm going to go ahead and put this in my source folder. And I'm going to name it config.yml. And this is what your configuration file should be named as well. Alright, so in this file that's created by Bukkit, you can add comments, you can add anything really into that. You could put in a normal configuration file, and it'll save everything to the jar file. So if you want to add comments in here, like specific notes that people should know when they're configuring your plugin, you can go ahead and do that, and they'll save automatically right here. So for example, let's say I wanted to have a message in here that I could get from that any players could set. I'm just going to go ahead and name this message, and it's going to be a string, of course, and I'm just going to make it something generic like this. Is the test message in our config.yml file, and that is definitely how you spell. Alright, so that was pretty simple. Now you may be asking, well, how do we save this file? So what you want to do is somewhere in your on enable is where I would recommend doing this, or if you have another method checking for updates or configurations or whatever of the sort, you can go ahead and put this in there. But I'm going to go ahead and just do this in my on enable. The first thing you want to do is create an object that represents your config.yml file so we can check if it exists or not. So how we can do this is go ahead and make an object that is a file, and we can go ahead and name this config file, and we want to create a new file that is going to be inside of our plugins directory, so we can just use get data folder if you're in your main class, and then the file name is going to be config.yml, of course. So now that we have this object, we can go ahead and check if it exists. So we want to do if config file does exist, or I guess we can do if it does not exist, we can go ahead and save the default config. And that is it. So I'm also going to add another method in here. So if our configuration file does exist, I want to go ahead and add a new path to our config file that says it checked to see if our configuration existed, and it did exist. So we're going to head and set a path here. So I'm just going to make it something simple. So to get the configuration file, what you actually have to do is get an instance of your main class, and then you can from there do get config, or not command, get config, and then there you can get or set any sort of paths. You can get different integers, different objects, you can get booleans, you can get locations, a whole bunch of different things you can get and set from configuration files. But for this, we're just going to go ahead and set a string. So we're going to set, I guess we can set new message to the config file exists. So what this is going to do is right in here, it's going to make a new path named new message, and it's going to have our new message right in here. But we're not going to add that to the default because it's going to create that path for us. Let's say we wanted to get a certain value. Let's say we want to print out whatever the message is that it sets to the console. So we're going to go ahead and I personally use the logger because I believe that's what everybody should use, but you can send a message to the console however you like in theory. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and create a string here, and we can just name this message. So we're going to get the configuration file, and you can go ahead and create an object for the configuration file if you're doing this a lot, just so you don't have to keep reading the configuration file into memory, because that just uses too many resources and would not be good. Not at all. So we can go ahead and get a string from new message, and it will go ahead and pull this message from our config file. And then in here we can go ahead and print, we'll just print the message out. We won't add anything else that's special. Or I guess we can go ahead and add an identifier of sorts. We'll just put new message, just so we can tell what the heck that message is coming from. Anyways, that's it. That's how you basically set up your little default config file here. It's pretty simple. Alright, one thing I forgot to mention is that anytime you edit your files in Java, you have to save them. This is a new mistake I made. Luckily I caught it before I even built the project, but never forget to do this. Whenever you set a value inside of a configuration file, after you're done editing it, you have to save it, or else it won't save your changes, obviously. So to do this with the default configuration, all you have to do is type in save config, just like that. It's very simple. Bukkit makes it easy. Now we're going to get into custom configurations. Now this is where it gets a little more complex. Now everything, so this config file and your plugin file are resources inside of your jar file. If you don't know what resources are, they're basically just extra files that your plugin that you use inside of your plugin. So you can have like images, a whole bunch of different things as your resources, but for Bukkit plugins you generally only have configuration files. So for example, two default resources that are created by Bukkit are the plugin.yml and config.yml. But let's say we want to add our own custom resource that's saved in the jar file, and then is that can be saved to the plugin. Alright, hopefully that made sense there. If not, hopefully this will clear it up for you. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this file named plugin data. It's just data that's going to be the same in every single plugin. It's not going to vary from server to server. Every single instance of my plugin is going to have this file in it. It's the data for the plugin. So this is an instance where you would use a resource. It's something that's the same. It's static for all users. So we can go ahead and name this plugin data, and we'll keep it a YML file. Alright, so in here we want to have, let's put the name, the version, and all the stuff that's in our plugin.yml. We'll just go ahead and copy on right over to here, just as an example. So I want this file to be saved in a path inside of the main plugin folder. I don't want it to be inside of the exact plugin directory. I want it to be in the root plugin directory is what I meant. So the first thing we want to do is create a file object, just like we did for the Bukkit configuration file, so we can check if it exists. And we're going to make a method that gets and saves our configuration in here. We're going to do all that stuff right inside of this class. So let's go ahead and start with that. Let's go ahead and make a public void named load data, and this is just going to be running our on enable. And what this method is going to do is going to check to see if our plugin data file exists, just like we did inside of our main class with our default configuration file. So we're going to go ahead and create a couple objects here. The first one is going to be a private file, and we can go ahead and name this data file. And we're going to create a new file just like we did in our main class, almost the same way. And now I'm going to go ahead here and set up an instance of my main, or actually I already did this. I can go ahead and get an instance of my main class just like this. I'm not saying this is how you should get an instance of your main class. This is just how I'm doing it because I'm lazy. Alright. We're going to get the data folder from our plugin, and then we also want to go another folder deep inside of that. So I'm going to have, or actually, Java is all about keeping your code dynamic, so we're going to go ahead and use the file separator, so any operating system can use this plugin. And we're going to put in here the name of the folder we want it to be in. I'm just going to name this folder data. And then over here on the other side of this comma is where we have the actual name of the file, which is going to be plugin data.yml. Alright. So that is all good. And the second thing we want to do is load the configuration for the file. Now what the configuration is, so the file is the physical file on the disk, and the configuration file is the things that we can get and set different values from. So they're two different objects that do two different things, but we're going to use both of them. So we're going to create a private file configuration, and we can just name this data config is going to be YML configuration .load configuration, and we're going to insert our file variable right here. So it's going to load the configurations of that data file. So now we can use both of these variables when we're loading the data. So this is where you would do something else if your plugin was not a resource. Alright, my bad, let me rephrase that. So if your file is a resource, you can go ahead and just save that from your jar file. It's already in there, it's already stored. But let's say it's something that is created based off of a variable that the player creates whenever they're using your plugin. In that case, you wouldn't use the save resource method. You would just save the file. You would create a new file and then save all the data to that file. You would just write everything to the file inside of this method. You wouldn't just save the data that comes from the jar file. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, I'll go ahead and show you. So the first thing we want to do is, as I said, since this is a resource, we're going to check if it exists and then just save it, copy it from the jar to the plugin data folder. So we're going to do if data file does exist, or we'll do if it does not exist. Alright, and we can use a method called save resource that's given to us by the Bukkit API. So just do main.save resource, and then here's the path inside of your jar to the file. So if you want to have it inside of a different folder, such as data, as I had earlier, but I changed it a little bit, as you can see, you would put that here. But since it's just plugin data.yml inside of our resources file, which is our source folder, we can just put the name of the file right here. And then here, inside of this second argument, is whether or not to replace the file. And I'm going to go ahead and put true, just because we already made sure it does not exist. So if your file is a resource, you're done. It's saved. It's that simple. Now, how do you get the configuration for that? Well, we already did that right up here. So just make sure that this file is going to be in the same directory as you saved it. That's the only thing you need to make sure of. And yeah, you can just use this variable right here to get and access all the values. So for example, or I'm going to do this example after I show you how to save a file that's not a resource. So let's say if the new file we're making, we'll go ahead and just do this inside of the same class. I'll go ahead and do this a little lower just to organize it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file and new configuration, but instead of naming it data file, I'm going to name it info file. So we're going to have an information file and data file, which is basically going to do the same exact thing, but yep. Alright. Or we'll name this plugin info. Alright, so this file is not going to be a resource, so you may be asking, well, how do you get and set all the default values? Now this is a little more tedious than doing it the other way, but it works the exact same. Well, not exactly the same, but relatively the same. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that the file does not exist, as we did before. That's the first step every time, because if it exists, you don't want to run any of this code. So if info file does not exist, then we want to create it here. So we can go ahead and use this handy old method, main dot, or sorry, it's actually off of the file variable, so we can use our variable named info file dot save. Oh, my bad. It's create new file. That's the name of the method, and we have to surround this with a try and catch. It should, yeah. Alright. So if it cannot create the new file, we're just gonna return, because that's not going to happen in this case. There's no method that this could throw, or no error this could throw in this case. So now that the file actually exists, we can go ahead and write all the configuration to the file. So you want to do exactly what we did up here. So I'm going to go ahead and move this into here actually, because we don't want an error, because this file will not exist if the plugin has not run yet. So we're going to go ahead and put this variable in here. So right here we can get and set a whole bunch of different values from this info configuration variable. So we can do just as we did in our main class, info config dot set, and we can go ahead and set any path we want here. We're going to name this test path, and then after this we can go ahead and name our path. So we're gonna just say this is a test. Alright, and then you always want to save after you edit a file. It will not save automatically. You have to write in the code save file. This is a beginner mistake that people make all the time, so I just want to reiterate, save your files. So we're actually going to make a whole new method for saving this file, because we want to be able to call this anywhere in our plugin. So we can go ahead and do public void. You can make this a boolean if you want to check if the file saves or not, but I don't want to do that in this case. We can just name this save file, and then we want to pass in, or I guess since we're only using this class for one specific file, info config, we don't have to pass in the configuration and the file. We can just use that there. But if you're using this method for multiple files, you would just pass in the file object and the file configuration object right here, and then use those inside of the method. But as I said, we only have one file, so we don't need to do that. We can just go ahead and hard code this in. Alright, so how do we save our file configuration to the file? So since this method is going to run right when the plugin starts, I know for a fact the file is going to exist, so I can go ahead and just put this in right here. Alright, sorry about that. Anyways, what you want to do is take your file configuration variable, and then off of that you can go ahead and save your configuration to a file. We can just go ahead and pass our file object in here. It's actually named info file. That's what it is, and this also needs to be surrounded by a try catch statement. So there we go. That's all you have to do to save your file. You can go ahead and add a little message here to log to the console that your file is saved, whatever you want it to do, but I'm not going to do that in this instance. So we can go ahead and do save file like that, and it will save our info configuration file just like that. Alright, so the third type of configuration is definitely the most complex one. It's object configuration. Now for this, you want to keep it as dynamic as possible, while also minimizing all the variables you have inside of the class to reduce resources. So you're going to only put the necessities in here, such as a file named file. We're going to go ahead and make the file of all the players on the server containing such information such as their health, their name, things like that. So we're going to name or make a file named player file, and then we're going to make a file configuration named player config. Okay, so first we want to create a constructor. In this constructor, we're going to pass in the unique ID of a player. Alright. So, the first thing we want to do is create the player file object. So we can go ahead and create a new file here that is in our data folder, our main class. And then we want to use get data folder. And then we can go ahead and save this in a folder named, let's say, player data. How does that sound? Well, we want to fix this. Alright. So it's going to be saved in a folder named player data, and we want the name of the file to be the player's unique ID. So we're going to turn their ID to a string and then go ahead and put YML on the end of that, and that's going to be the name of the player file. Now we can go ahead and check if this file exists, and if it does exist, we want to load it into memory. If not, we want to create a new one, and then we also want to return the object that is this class. So to do this, we want to see if the player file exists, just like we did in the other times. So if the player file, or actually this time we want to check if it does exist, because we want to get the player file, or we want to get the configuration from the player file. So what we can do is do player config equals YML dot load configuration, and we can go ahead and pass in the player file right here. And that's all. Otherwise, we want to set, or we can go ahead and put this here just to, clean it up. Anyways, now we want to check if the file does not exist. So we want to create the new file, and we want to create a new configuration. So how we do this is by doing basically, well, I guess that can stay the same, and all we have to do is get the player config. So we can do this dot player config is equal to, well, I mean, I guess we don't really need, oh yeah, we do, because we have to save the file. That's right, my bad, brain fart. Alright, this is definitely what I want to do. Yes, alright, so we want to save the file. So we can do player file dot, and we're going to create a method for saving it, actually, just like we did before. Well, I guess we can make this a public method because we're going to need to access it. We can do public void save file, and then we can just do, since we're going to be creating multiple instances of this object, each file is going to have its own object. We can just go ahead and use these variables right up here. So first thing we want to do is, I guess we don't need to check if it exists because we're creating it right here if it does not. So we just have to do player file, save file, or sorry, create new file, and surround it with try catch, of course. And there we go. Alright, my bad. I went ahead and changed this method up a little bit. I'm gonna do the check down here to see if the player file exists. That just makes more sense to me. So we're gonna check right here if the player file actually exists. So if the player file does not exist, what we want to do is create a new player file, and then down below this we can go ahead and save the configuration to the file. To do that, we do as we did before, which is just player config save, and then we can go ahead and pass in our player file right here, and once again surround this with a try catch statement. And there we go. Alrighty, so go ahead and get rid of that, and I believe this is all we need to create the files. We still need to add a method to get and save, or get the player file and config because that would be helpful, obviously. And if you want, you can save the player's unique ID to this as well, but I'm not going to be using that because I don't see how that could be helpful in this situation, but it could be. So here we're going to create new methods for getting the player file and then getting the player configuration. Alright, and as I said before, I don't know if I'm going to cut that part out or not. Just in case I do cut it out, do not do this. Pass an instance of your main class through this constructor. It's just better. Alright, if you don't understand why, just know it's better. Alright, or it's better practice, not that it has any real effect on the code, which is why I'm doing it this way. Alright, anyways, this should work. Now all we have to do is detect whenever a player joins or gets damaged, because we want to save their health as well, and then just save the files there. So I'm not going to show you how to do that, but I will show you guys all this in action. So if you do need help with listeners though, doing those things I just said, checking if players joins or get damaged, go ahead and check a link down in the description. I'll have a tutorial on how to use the Bukkit Event API. Anyways guys, enough of that. I'm going to go ahead and see you all in the server. Alright guys, and as you can see here, we have all of our files loaded. So we have our config.yml, which only has one message because I haven't started the server up a second time, but if I restarted the server, it would generate the second message. And if I go to the plugin data file, you will see it has all the information that I copy pasted in there. And if I did put comments in there, those would get saved as well. And if I head over to the plugin info file, as you can see, it has the message that we've put in there. And if I go to my player data folder, you can see my unique ID, and if we open it up, you can see that I put the amount of sessions that we have in there, and every time the player joins, it increases the number of sessions. Yeah, and that's about it. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy this, or if this video did help you, please leave a like. I do appreciate it, and if you need any help, let me know down in the comments. Now I want to say one more thing. If these videos seem improvised, it's because they are. I do not take the time to plan out what I'm going to do right before. I just kind of think of an idea and then I kind of roll with it. Like for example, when I was making the tutorial on the Event API, I didn't know that I was going to be I didn't know which events I was going to be using whenever I started making the video. I just kind of made it up on the fly. That's just easiest for me because that's how I program really. I don't really like to sit down and plan too much, even though a lot of people do. If I do too much of that, then I'll just lose view of the bigger picture. That's just me personally. People have their own styles, but that's why these videos do seem improvised, because they most definitely are. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching, and that is all for now. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Nice! The mutt's nuts, in fact.